This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you inside the Brooklyn Bunker for show 389, Friday, November 30th edition. This is the first time in a while I've sat here and actually gotten to listen to Willie Nile and Travis Stone herald us onto the track for this podcast. I guess that means we've been pre-recording a lot. When we pre-record, I don't always listen to it, though sometimes I'll listen to it just beforehand to get myself psyched up. But I'm not like listening to it as my cue in the same way as when we do the show in this live format as we're doing today. Those interested can check out the podcast live via DRF programming, DRF Live specifically, and you can find that on the DRF site. There are typically links tweeted out. We go live, or the shows are broadcast live. They're not always done live, but they're broadcasted typically Tuesdays and Fridays from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern Standard Time. But of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, etc., etc. I am joined today, as I am most weeks, though not the last show, but most of the time, by a man who is known by many monikers, including the People's Champion. On the other show, we call him Mr. Friday Night Lights. I have lost track of his peripatetic machinations. I believe, though, he is back on the planet Texas as opposed to in Lex Vegas. Wherever he is, I know who he is. Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
PTF, what's going on? I'm glad to be back with you. I always miss you. But yes, I am in the planet Texas, but not for long. Not for long.
Busy travel weekend. Anything exciting going on?
I'm going to be meeting you in Lexington next week for a little further push for the World Horse Players Tour. So hopefully that goes good. And then I'm home for a while, and then I think I'll probably chill until I do my normal LA for Christmas move, where we get out to Santa Anita for opening day on December 26th.
That is, I'm glad you mentioned the top secret mission on WHT Business, JK, to Lexington next week, because it relates to a question that so many have asked, and we appreciate the concern and the inquisitiveness of folks who want to know what's going on with WHT. We hate to have to be so coy, but it's really a situation where negotiations are ongoing. Horse racing business does some things well. One thing it doesn't do that well necessarily is move all that fast. So with apologies for being, with withholding, we don't really have news right now, but we're working on some news, and who knows, it could be very big news. Did I leave anything out of that update?
No, I don't think so. I think that, like you said, nothing moves too quick in racing, especially when that thing is like different or change or like new, innovative, like those move a little bit slower normally.
I think that's right. We talked a bit about the innovation committee at the Breeders' Cup in our conversation, or my conversation with Craig Bernick. Let me guess, JK, just like you never read my columns, you haven't listened to the show that you weren't on yet, right?
Well, it's weird. It's a weird thing to like listen to the podcast that you're on, but then I guess I'm just programmed to not listen because I'm usually on it, and the times I'm not on it, I forget not to listen.
Fair enough. I do think you should check that out, though, because Craig gets into a lot of interesting stuff about not only his family and time in racing, but just some generally good industry ideas, and a little bit about the Breeders' Cup. There's some interesting, lots to unpack in there. We got some nice compliments, and very grateful to Craig for carving the hour out of his day. And because no good deed goes unpunished, we will certainly have him on back again soon. Maybe we'll make him handicap some races next time. We have a couple of other listener questions. One was very specific, but I thought it was worth throwing out there, about the buyer for last year's Pegasus. And I'm going to give myself an opportunity to look something up while we talk about this. But the question was, apparently the figure had been raised at some point from a 119 to a 120. And the question was about when that happened, which unfortunately the answer is I have no idea. But I thought it just led to an opportunity to discuss the general concept of figures being raised after the fact, something that I believe is smart. Obviously, it's not something you want to see all the time. But as we spoke about with Craig Milkowski fairly recently, once you have better information, don't you want the better information? And my question for you, though, JK, is would that ever matter to you, a figure moving one point or another?
No, it doesn't bother me. I don't mind if they adjust it. But I also, I had this conversation with Paul Matisse not too long ago, I think before the Breeders' Cup. Like, I don't look at a figure and say that horse ran in 98, this horse ran in 96, this horse has a better chance of beating this horse. I look at it as this horse ran between a 95 and a 98. If he runs on his best, he can run a 98, a 99. It's more of a range for me is how I use figures. And so, I don't care if there's a couple clicks here or there. I'm more concerned with the 5, 6, 7 point clicks.
I feel the same way. It's very rare that I'd want to split the hair of a figure being changed one way or another. In fact, just to use this specific example, it means absolutely nothing to me that this number was raised. In my handicapping, I can't ever think of a situation where it would matter. Sometimes it is helpful when going through the process that Mike Maloney describes in Betting with an Edge of creating ability figures. Sometimes it is helpful to put it down to the point just so you can sort of rank horses. And at some point you might decide to split that hair of, okay, these are the ones I'm going to throw in for a certain position in certain combinations. I get the mental, as almost like a mental exercise, striving for that type of precision. But in the real world, in terms of a figure on a race, I can't really think of when 1 point would mean anything to me. So yeah, I'm looking now at the chart and the figures that horses ran the next time out. And there's not a glaring reason to see why this particular figure would have been raised at any point. But I'll tell you this, it looks like a good number. You do see a couple of horses who were way back in the field who earned the same or stronger figures next out. Maybe that had something to do with it. A horse like Seeking the Soul, a very solid benchmark, coming back and running the same number, while, like I said, some farther back in the field improved their figures. Maybe that was enough of a reason to tweak that up. Anyway, don't want to spend too much time on that, but the other reason I wanted to ask it is I thought that it dovetailed nicely into a second question. And this is one that I just sort of came up with. There was an interesting debate on Twitter that, as so many things on Twitter do, got a little vitriolic for my taste. And so I didn't want to wade into the conversation there. But I thought there was some merit in the conversation. And it started out with a guy I know. I'd even call him a friend, who's in the same book as you, JK, in the Steve Davidowitz book about betting on big days. Rob Henney is his name. And he was talking about how he doesn't use speed figures to bet, that he comes up with angles and does other things, some of them quite well, I might add. He has a particular knack when it comes to sussing out maiden winners, first-time starters, I should say, in maiden races. Maybe there's a causal connection there between a lack of being figure focused and being able to do so well at that. But that was his perspective, and he got savaged. Maybe he was a little braggy in the way he said it. I'd have to go back and look again. That maybe led to some of the vitriol, but people saying, oh, it's irresponsible to talk about betting or to give out tips when you're not looking at figures, et cetera, et cetera. I just thought it was an interesting start of a conversation. I mean, everything I do is rooted in figures, but I get the idea that they're so part of the market now for someone who's developed a talent to come up with other ways of evaluating things, since the figures are sort of reflected in other things you might look at anyway, like the betting odds, that it didn't seem crazy or irresponsible to me. It made me say, oh, that's interesting that somebody would want to bet without the benefit of being able to do a good analysis of figures. But then another part of me, of course, had a similar knee-jerk reaction to some of the critics that it seemed a little out of step. Where do you stand on this issue?
I think it's a betting personality thing, and what I mean by that is, like, I think that if you are a non-figure player, you don't use your figures, you're using the things that Rob's using, I would think your strike rate is going to be significantly lower. I feel like you'll be able to find some price horses, but you're going to find them less often. You're not going to connect as often as a player who is a little bit more rooted in the figures themselves. I have a problem with people telling me that figures don't matter. I don't have a problem with people telling me that they choose to use a different method that fits their handicapping and betting personality. So, I've had some conversations with people that say figures don't matter. I do consider them to be kind of crazy, but
Pipes, who's an excellent handicapper, he's been on this show practically giving out the Travers pick 6 the other year, and you hear him talk racing, and he knows racing. He doesn't want to hear about figures when I start talking about figures.
But his strike, I love Pipes to death, but his strike rate is probably a little bit lower than someone who is using figures. But that's fine. He'll still find some, occasional horses that I couldn't find based on the figures. So I think that, like I said, it really just comes down to your personality and what your goal is and how you're gonna obtain it. Now, like I said, I don't want to give anyone a free pass. If you feel like figures don't matter, then I think you're crazy. They matter. They absolutely matter.
About that. Let's talk about that for a minute. And I think that's a good point. That you might be someone who's talented enough / fortunate enough / whatever you want to say to have come up with a way to play this game that doesn't involve how fast the horses have run in particular races. But if only from the effect that they have on the market. When you're saying something doesn't matter, maybe what somebody would say that, would mean to say is it doesn't matter in terms of where I'm going to find value. Okay, I can listen to that statement, but they're so predictive and they've just provided such a groundwork for how we and industry people understand the game. To blanket say they don't matter, like it's made up the tired old saw, time only matters if you're in jail, that kind of nonsense. I mean, that's been disproved decades ago, and I guess none of us want to hear that in 2018. So I guess what it really comes down to, JK, is the conversation just needs to be refined a little bit more. And it makes sense to maybe say they don't matter in terms of certain individuals betting, but obviously I always say even if I'm not going to find that many bets just based off figures, occasionally you will find bets, I think, more often when you have good reasons to question a figure, but it's still the underpinning of everything I do and something that's just super important. Any other thoughts on that before we move forward?
No, I think we scraped it pretty close to the bone. And like I said, I think it matters. And someone who says it doesn't, I disagree with. However, I don't knock someone for trying to have an angle that doesn't involve them.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. All right, let's move on, JK. I think it's time to talk about this fun new idea. We're debuting it here. We have never done anything like this before. It's the first ever DRF Players Podcast holiday quiz. This idea is largely stolen from my friends at the Final Furlong podcast. Hi, Emmett. Hi, Kevin. And as hopefully as Gil Alexander has been very gracious as I've stolen many things from him over the years, Emmett and Kevin feel similarly. We're not going to do it exactly the way that they do it. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to have a listener competition for a cash prize and also the opportunity. And really, obviously, you're going to be playing for the cash rather than this opportunity. But the top 2 contestants, I think we'll do 2. Does 2 make sense? I think it does.
I agree. 2 sounds good.
top 2 people who send us emails explaining why they should be on the DRF Players Podcast will compete on a special episode to be broadcast. It will be our episode closest to Christmas, I'm guessing, or Christmas week, or right after. It'll be depending on how the days fall and if we're going to do something about Santa Anita opening day, etc. It'll be right around then. We're going to broadcast this DRF podcast holiday quiz. Those 2 will face off, and it will be questions about this show. This is going to be nothing Googleable. This is all going to be things that I'm confident only a real fan of the show would be able to know. So, I mean, if you're a brand new listener, you know what? Don't give up. Include that. Maybe we'll have some fun. We'll keep some recent references on there. But you will have an advantage if you've been a listener since the beginning. Let's put it that way. There will be some references to things that come up time and time again on this show. Eric Bialik is not eligible, unfortunately. I think he'd do pretty well, but he is not. He's too close. He's he's within the tent of the DRF Players Podcast family. We'll I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and we'll get some good stuff out of it. So the email address, podcast@drf.com. I have email correspondences with many listeners from my Gmail, which is fine too. If you have that already, hit me up there, but it'll be probably easier just to send everything to podcast@drf.com. JK and I will go through them and we will choose our 2 contestants. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to see, I think coming up with the questions, making fun of ourselves is going to be probably the most entertaining portion of it. But I can think of some good ideas already.
Great. I don't want to give anything away. We won't put anybody nearly as on the spot as Acacia Courtney put the both of us the other day. I can promise you that much.
I still blush when we talk about this.
Somehow it got life again this week. Somebody must have done it in case you missed it, or a throwback Thursday or something. I was getting texts and tweets about that. Acacia, by the way, is somebody we need to have on this show at some point, sooner rather than later. And we will not retaliate. We'll just we'll have a perfectly straightforward segment with her. But it would be great. It would be great to hear her voice on this show as well. All right. So with that business out of the way, should we talk about some races, JK?
Absolutely. I'm
going to pull a fast one on you, and we're going to start with Del Mar because there's some good stuff out there this weekend. And this is going to be one of those where, obviously a lot of the times I thoroughly do the work. Other times when we bring up races on the show, I'm just really curious to hear your opinion. I've had a quick chance to look through these Del Mar races, but I have not I've not properly handicapped them. So I'm looking for I have some questions for you, and I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. The first thing that struck me looking at Saturday's Hollywood Derby at Del Mar was a couple of horses in here who you have sort of prickly relationships with in Raging Bull and Carrick. I'm just envisioning you being torn because I know you love the East Coast graded stakes turf horse shipping out to the West Coast, but does it hold for these two?
I don't know what my problem is with Raging Bull, but I remember last time he got beaten, I told you he was going to get beat.
He did not care for him last time either.
I've been telling you he's going to get beat like 3 times in a row, and he beat us like 3 times prior to that.
You picked against him the 4 out of 5 times he won, and you always forget this. It's so funny. You're so egotistical. You forget that in that race on, I think it was August 3rd, you keep saying he beat us. He did not beat us because I insist. One of the rare times I absolutely insisted you put the horse on the ticket. So I remember we were. I remember so well that we were at Peabody's in Saratoga. Yes, very good. Okay.
You were sweating some baseball game.
The Cubs, man. The Cubs came through for me that day, as I recall.
Thank
goodness, friends in faraway places where that stuff's legal.
I'm gonna start my pick with a little bit of a trivia, opinion question. Who do you think are Chad Brown's 2 best older male turf horses.
This may be Breeders' Cup bias coming in, JK, and I'm obviously not. I'm not going to talk so much that I have time to look it up. But the two who pop to mind are Robert Bruce and Analyze It. I think probably just because that's the answer, or maybe because of Breeders' Cup bias.
We do a good job together here, Pete. I knew you were going to go there, and what if I told you there's a horse in this race that worked head-to-head with both of those horses on the turf, and was kind of inseparable, if not embarrassing at all?
Very interesting. I'd be very interested. Tell me more about this horse.
It's not Raging Bull. Instilled Regard, making his turf debut for Chad Brown. Looked up some of the works just kind of looked up. There's another site you can look at some work videos on. If you don't know what it is, then just look around Twitter a little bit. You'll find it. There's you can search the horse's name. I searched Instilled Regard and noticed that he worked with Robert Bruce and he worked with Analyze It leading up to the Breeders' Cup, and did just fine in those two spots. Comes back out west, obviously, where he did most of his running when he was under the care of Jerry Allendorfer. He's 12-1 in this spot. Obviously, River Boyne, Raging Bull, Carrick all have much better resumes on the grass, even have at it. But I think and it's unfortunate you're not going to get the 12-1. It just won't happen. But you'll still get a better number than I think that you could get, maybe an 8, a 7, or something like that. So Instilled Regard, I'm going to try to mess around with him a little bit. What should be a pretty good price based on the works that he's had with those two quality horses out on the East Coast.
You never have to twist my arm to get me interested in an arch first-time turf. And this one certainly has a story and a reason why he wouldn't have been tried on turf in the however many career starts that he's had. So I'm super intrigued by that idea. And it's a big full field. There's a lot of stories floating around here. I think you're probably right that the 12-1 on the Brown factor alone won't happen. But definitely something to pay attention to. This is a grade 1, but it's not a grade 1. I mean, it's a restricted grade 1 late in the year, right? So it's not maybe as big of a leap at all as it seems for a horse like this, who's run some competitive races in more, grade 1 plus type spots in the past on a different surface, but at a time when that different surface is probably the better indicator of quality anyway. So I think it's a really good case. Wagering wise, what pools did you imagine you'll try to be playing here?
Well, I think if you're going to try to use Instilled Regard in that angle, I think you're going to be able to have him in second and third. Obviously, first time, you don't want to lean on him and single him in picks and things like that. You definitely want to have him. He'd be an A type for me. So it just depends. I haven't looked at the races surrounding him. Obviously, if I can find some opinions I like around those races, that would help quite a bit. But I definitely want to try to hook him up with the logical horses and exactas and tries.
All right, let's move on to Sunday at Del Mar, the quirky Seaside Oval. Boy, I can't get over. I keep thinking back fondly to that trip to San Diego, JK, and how much fun it is out there. Oh, I know. I left a headline out that we should talk about at some point. The Saratoga news. I was, and for those who haven't heard, it's all still rumor stage, right? So we'll wait till it gets fully and properly written up in Daily Racing Form to have our real conversation about it. But rumors of Saratoga starting on July 11th, maybe, still going through Labor Day, and a 5-day race week. And it sounds like in this rumor version anyway, the race week would run from Wednesday through Sunday. I was wondering perhaps using the benefit of having a little extra time up there to rekindle my old school tradition of always at least spending 1 week in Del Mar. It was so enjoyable seeing great friends out there. I just love being there. I love looking at the ocean,
As a Saratoga guy, we can't bury the lead too much. I have to ask you just a real simple, basic thumbs up, thumbs down, or in the middle, or we can even call it buy, sell, hold. how are you feeling about this rumor of the same 40 days but 5-day race week and a little bit longer of a meet?
I'm buying. But I'm buying with the idea that I want to, hear and listen to more people. There is some legitimate concern that I saw my friend Teresa Gennaro voice on Twitter about like what it could mean for a lot of horseman types having to be up there extra. If that's, I'd want to talk to some people whose lives it affects before like wholly diving into the pool. But like I'm more than dipping my toe in the pool. Like I've got my whole ankle. I'm in there like to like mid thigh. I just because there's so much about it that I do like.
I heard someone very smart say that it seems like they're missing an opportunity to include the 4th of July, but I mean that's probably deeper down the hole than we're wanting to go at the moment.
I a little disagree. In that I don't exactly disagree, but I just have something to say about it, which is the original rumor I had heard. This rumor was all around Saratoga last year that it was going to happen, that it was going to start before 4th of July. And like that to me was, I don't know, my gut was it just definitely felt too long. I was a little concerned about expanding the meet, having that big weekend to start the Stars and Stripes, which they've done a really good job of at Belmont, getting that sort of going as a big Belmont weekend. And I was worried that by doing this to Saratoga and starting with that, and if there was it seemed like it might be too much too much to do in one expansion was my fear. And I was a little scared about that. I even remember thinking to myself, like, there's a very real chance I couldn't get there 4th of July weekend. And like, if I can't get there, like it made me worry that like there might be a whole lot of people that couldn't get there. So I feel like this is maybe you'd call it a half measure that, again, if successful, I do think that could be a logical next step down the line. And then I would surely hope that would be the end expansion of the Saratoga meet for all time. But we'll see. But I mean, I get it. Like that was a big part of the original rumor. And if it looks like this is going to work, and then it comes down to adding that final week and starting with a bang. But I don't know. I like that. I like the idea of that as another big downstate racing thing that happens. That's just my 2 cents. Anyway. We did what we said we weren't going to do, and that's my fault just because I got excited talking about it. But like we said, we'll wait for real news and we'll react and we'll try to look at this issue from a lot of different sides. I mean, I'm like, in a way, I'm the wrong guy to ask, right? Saratoga property owner, gonna like it for that reason. It gives me a chance to go to Saratoga for longer. The 5 days, I will emphasize this one last point. The 5 days to me would just be so huge in terms of improving the experience for horse players and
the racing. Yeah.
And it should really help the racing, the ability to get horses running more times at the meet and theoretically more competitive, bigger fields, etc. I'd love to hear what the data crowd has to say about that. And I'm sure we will hear from them, but it's certainly, it's a logical hypothesis to me that should improve the quality of racing. And there you have it. We'll talk more about that. But I do honestly think I would, in a funny way, feel less bad about missing what I need to miss of Saratoga to go out for the full Del Mar opening weekend. What do you typically? How many weekends do you typically do in Del Mar?
Well, 2 years. Last year I did that show, so I was there quite a bit. Usually just the contest. And then if I can sneak in one more like random weekend, that's always good. But it's usually just the contest. But then I've been a little bit, this year obviously, and the years past, and hopefully even more next year. I'm becoming a little bit more heavy duty Saratoga, so that obviously cuts into it.
Right. Well, and you had some work at Saratoga last year too. 2 years ago, your work was at Del Mar. This last year, your work was at Saratoga. I don't know if there's some way we can swing it. Bring the kids, rent some little place on the beach. Just turn our lives into the podcast and record some fun stuff and splash around. It could be fun.
Always fun.
Let's move on to the matriarch, and we're going to start here with some horses a lot of horses here with some serious DRF podcast history. And who knows, some of this might come up on the quiz. I see Kedura, who of course was Sean Tugel's best bet of the day. At least it was his best bet of the day when he did the Travers podcast this year. I feel like somehow he told me, revealed later, wagering wise, he might have managed to mess it up, but he did. Anyone listening to him would have hit the Boston Spa very nicely this year. We've talked about Daddy as a legend a lot on the show, but really the most important horse in the podcast history here is Uni. Do you remember why, JK?
It's a Fu Man handlebar, Fu Manchu, whatever one it is. It's a facial hair bet.
We were told the facial hair bet. That's right. Uni beating Proctor's Ledge at Keeneland, and you had to look like a 1970s relief pitcher for a week. It was really, and I bring that up because it was, one of the 4 times I beat you in a head-to-head, and now I think your record is 976-4.
And the worst part about it is you beat me with a horse that I genuinely love. Like I genuinely have like a huge horse crush on. And it just so happened that I had another horse crush working at the moment and you took advantage of it.
Who do you like in this spot?
Well, I tell you who I like. I think how fun is it that you can claim a horse for 40, win 8 races in a row, including 3 graded stakes and a grade 1 with Basilica. She's not so much who I like. I mean, she's obviously super live. She's proven that she can compete with these types. But 2 horses kind of caught my attention. Mission Impossible, obviously, with the switch to Rudy Brissett off of her QE2 try, where she was kind of closing into those blue fractions if you look at time form. And then obviously Uni. Those 2 horses were the ones that I was trying to decide between. Ultimately, I went with Uni. And the reason that I went with Uni is Timeform US had her with a little bit of a faster late kick and being a closer, expecting that her run is going to come later in the race. And the fact that Joelle is riding her, who has spent a lot of time at Del Mar, versus Florent, who hasn't spent as much time at Del Mar, because that turf course is a little bit tricky. I don't have any proof. I just feel like to win at Del Mar on that turf course, you have to move on the straights. You have to be aggressive, get into position on the straights, because the turns are a little bit paperclipish. And so I feel like Joelle will just always have her in a better position, and her kick down the straight is just so devastating. So I ended up going with Uni just based on those 2 things. But Mission Impossible is obviously very live in there, but Uni's the one I want.
Uni was my pick anyway, based on sentimentality, but you actually make a cogent case, other than she's the one who made JK have to have the funny horseshoe mustache for a week. How do you see the pace shaking out in here? I love the point you made about Rosario and the turf course, and I think you didn't say it out loud, but the implication of how well he fits her as well. Do you think there'll be enough speed to set up the kick?
I do think so. I think Excellent Sunset's got a little bit of pace. He's drawn on the inside. She'll obviously go a bit. Valdorna isn't slow away from there, especially with some of her old school dirt tactics, and then with having Mike Smith up. If Fahan Murrah doesn't need any explanations, Kid Ayers run some of her best races on the front end. Miss Bad Behavior will go on with it, especially with Tyler Bays. It feels like they're going to run a little bit in front of Uni and Mission Impossible. They shouldn't have any excuses.
You'd like to think so in a grade 1 turf race, that we won't see the New York crawl out there. Well, we might actually see some horses running early in a grass race. Speaking of New York, let's talk about this day of racing. I kind of forgot, even early last week, I was thinking that these races were going to be the Thanksgiving Saturday, forgetting that I guess for the last 2 or 3 years now, they've moved them to this Saturday instead. And I have to say, I think I prefer it. Thanksgiving weekend, a lot of running around, and yes, and obviously there's some great racing, but I don't know. I kind of like that New York and Del Mar get to have their moment, a little bit of an extra moment this weekend. Just spreading things out works for me. We'll start off with the Demoiselle, and obviously, if you're talking about it from a racing perspective, the conversation is going to probably begin with Enliven. But JK, I just have to give props. I don't know much at all about Arundel Farm. I think they're, just looking at the PP here, they're Florida based. It must be in Ocala. But I mean, the naming of this filly. For all our mutual experience, our separate conclusions are the same, and though we chase between reality and madness, it's either sadness or euphoria. Who wouldn't love Philly Joel?
Look, you know me. I've made a joke that I don't typically listen to music of people with real names. But when I saw this, I thought it was really, really funny. Philly Joel is great. It also reminded me of our famous friend Philly Joe. Made me think of Philly Joe a little bit.
About that, I hadn't made the Philly Joe connection yet. Absolutely.
Very good name. Very good name. Is Sally's song have something to do with it?
There's no Billy Joel song that I know of that would push you in that direction, but maybe just the song got them thinking, or maybe there's a deeper reference here that I'm missing. I'm gonna go research the family, looking for Billy Joel puns the rest of the day. Thank you for sending me down that rabbit hole.
Very, very interesting. I mean, obviously, Kieran on the rail with the In Livin', and then Philly Joel should be. Philly Joel is actually hard to say when you have a friend named Philly Joe, just to be honest. Those two horses should be forward in there. I kind of like the horse shipping up from Churchill, the horse for Ian Wilkes. Ian Wilkes isn't a throw him on the van just to throw him on the van guy, right? I mean, it's not something that he typically does. Gets Javier, who's been riding really well. The horses run that 1-turn mile at Churchill. So the little bit of the stretch out there should be finishing with the other two in front. And then also the inside hasn't been ideal at Aqueduct so far. And so I think that this filly will obviously have an outside kind of trip. So, I don't love the race. Obviously, if you're playing the early pick 5, you got to do something here on Saturday. But I would go with the 7 outside with Ian Wilkes, the Molto Bella.
Be ready for Enliven to be bet off the board. It's that same double fig thing we discussed last week, where the last 2 numbers are faster on the buyer scale than anything anyone in the field has ever run. Hey, it didn't work out so well for Restless Rider. Maybe you're smart in trying to beat Enliven. For me, it's more one to sit back and root for Philly Joel.
A little treat for those who are listening live. Word on the streets is that Kieran has a filly running today at Aqueduct that happens to be there's a possibility, backstretch chatter, that it might be his best filly. And this filly is 6-5 in a grade 2. So what does that say about the filly that's running today? I believe in the 4th. So if you're involved in Aqueduct here in the next couple of hours, make sure you give her an extra look.
And even if that's a good thing just to slug in the notes. I always like to hear that gossip, even when the horse doesn't run well. When you have that note, supposed to be one of the best 2-year-olds, that's the kind of thing that then when they make some sort of, maybe it doesn't work out what they're doing today, but maybe then when they're doing, if they're sprinting and then when they stretch out, sometimes those horses, a lot of serious horse players will make fun of backstretch info, and a lot of times it deserves to be made fun of. But you can find signal in it sometimes, and I like to at least know. It's just, if nothing else, it's interesting, and it can lead you to tidbits down the line. You can't just bet that horse today and be able to have any equity because of it, but knowing that might provide some value to you down the line. That would be my suggestion.
Who's the Kieran horse? We've done this question before, so I don't feel bad doing it. Who's the Kieran horse at Saratoga that ended up winning a graded stakes that was supposed to be the next running, and you said he didn't look sprinty when you saw him in the paddock?
Yeah, it was the horse.
The Dolphin horse. It was Kieran.
It was the horse that did well in the winter stakes at Aqueduct and then didn't train on. It's also popping in my head that it had an EN name.
It's not Enticed. It's Enticed won, I think, at Churchill. It was it was another one.
Enticed sounds right. Enticed didn't debut at Saratoga, and who did well in those Aqueduct stakes? If we look that up, formula.
No, it wasn't Enticed. Enticed won the horse. Oh my God, I'm gonna forget it now.
I hate it when you do this. By the way,
I've done this before.
Yeah, you thinking I'm gonna remember something on the fly? Like I need to prep, man. I'm old. I have a 5-year-old. Like the brain is a sieve.
I'll think about it. I'll figure it out.
We'll have the answer by the end of the show. Meanwhile, there's another musical tangent to go on here. I feel a little like out of step. It is 2018, referring to these artists from the 20th century with real names. I I was having a text conversation with our mutual friend, though I think he's better friends with Jake Ballas than he is with either of us, Sean Borman, this week about, we were just talking about, somehow we got on a musical tangent, and I had an idea for you, JK, for one of these. You ever been to one of these jockey karaoke things?
Yeah, I've been to them.
And sometimes it's more than just jockeys, right? There's other industry people who'll get up there. I'll never forget E.B. the Love Man at Saratoga a few years ago, doing his inimitable version of I think it was the strut. It was or the stroke or anyway. There's a lot of careers that man could have if the whole racing thing doesn't work out. Let's put it that way. But anyway, we had an idea for you to get up and perform in some sort of caricature costume, because you're the only one of us who's ever recorded a rap record. And the name concept, I remember what it was. It was an autocorrect gone wrong when I was texting about a race. And so autocorrect turned a trainer's name into the name I'm about to say. And then I realized it would be a great jockey karaoke character for you to debut live your rhyming skills. Thug McGahee. Can you just see it? I can see it on a record label. FEAT period Thug McGahee.
With a black shirt and a red hat.
Straight to the best of that one. Straight to the best. Oh, that's good stuff. All right.
Avery Island, Pete. Avery Island.
Avery Island. Okay. Yes. That's absolutely right. Right. You hear that this information can be filed away for later use and could sometimes be basically used as a de facto excuse. Race 6 is the Gopher Wand. It's a mile on the dirt. Red cap, black t-shirt. Sorry. Give me a second here. Return to the races of Marley's Freedom on that same rail here at Aqueduct. I really want to make a case for your love in this spot. And there's only one thing that gives me pause. Well, there's two things that give me pause. One is, do the connections mean that she gets wise guy bet all to heck into the teeth of Marley's Freedom, and you end up with something like 2-1 that wouldn't be interesting to me? That was one thing that gave me pause. And the other thing I noticed, I was liking her a lot out of the Gallant Bloom for having closed into what appeared to be a very moderate, if not slow pace. But Timeform US did have that track coded, as favoring closers, which just gave me a little bit more pause. Anyway, price will be the determining factor for me here. I don't see, if I'm playing picks, which I'm not sure I'm going to, I don't think I'd want to be taking on Marley's Freedom. But the horse I'd love to press, if at any kind of price, and I still probably would be number 5, Your Love. How do you see it?
I mean, I don't really understand why Marley's Freedom is in here, right? You got to ship across the country for a grade 3. She's already a grade 1 winner. So I don't really understand, you're trying to get some broodmare value by getting a graded stakes win at a mile, but she's already a grade 1 winner at 7, at Saratoga, that. I just don't understand why she's here. It feels weird to me. She's drawn on the inside. I would try to beat her here. I'm with you on Your Love. If I didn't pick her, I was going to pick Pacific Wind. I think Pacific Wind's probably not as good as some might think she is. But what I will say is that I think 1 1/8 is too far for her. I think the 1 1/16 of the Phipps was too good for her. And I think she kind of falls right where she needs to fall with the mile ruffian race that she ran at Belmont, the 1-turn mile, which she'll get here. She'll obviously get some pace to run into with Sauer and Marley's Freedom. Marley's Freedom's going to have to be aggressive from down there. She'll be coming swooping on the outside with Irad. That's kind of what he does. I think I'm going to pick Pacific Wind in here, obviously with Your Love being a little bit of a sexier version of what I think Pacific Wind might do. But I think Pacific Wind is going to be a better price, and I think that she might find her friends right here with a little bit of pace to close into going that flat mile.
Fair points, all. And the Spinster, a race that I really detested visually, there's another way of looking at that race and looking at the form coming out of it, that it's actually okay to good. and that would shine a more positive light on Pacific Wind. And you make a lot of good points. I would want the two of them, really. Would you? So if I'm going to play picks, I probably have to put the adult pants on and just decide to completely bet against Marley's Freedom. That doesn't quite feel right to me. You're okay completely fading?
Well, I think that if you're okay completely fading, it depends on what pool you're playing in, right? I mean, she's obviously the most likely winner when it comes to form and the Baffert factor and all of these things.
In the race,
but it's just weird that she's here. I just don't get it. But at the same time,
Square. Do you haven't you when you were out playing golf with LeBron and Ice-T? You didn't mention this one to him?
No, we didn't talk about this one, but we'll see what happens. I mean, she'll probably run off the screen, but it just doesn't feel. It feels weird for whatever reason.
And you didn't answer my question. Like they're in a pick larger than the double, would you be willing to leave out completely?
And I'm going to dodge it again because it depends on what you're using. It depends on what you're using in other legs, right? It depends what your opinion is in other legs. If you're playing some shorties like I'm playing in some of the other legs, then I wouldn't play the pick 5. I would just play the pick 4 and watch this race.
That's fair.
If you're playing it with a 20-1 shot, then and you want to play picks and you're going to use a 20-1 shot in the third leg, then you wouldn't be very smart to leave off the best horse in the race in Marley's Freedom.
Makes perfect sense. Hey, producer Craig, if you're paying attention, give me the all clear to run a couple of minutes late, assuming JK that's okay with you. I just don't want to. We might get it in under, but I do not want to rush through what we have left. There's some interesting stuff to talk about, and it starts.
Yeah,
good. It starts with the Remsen, which unfortunately lost. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's a better race for not having Code of Honor in it. Maybe this would have been an even shorter field because it did seem like 3 or 4 came out of the woodwork when it was announced that one would not be running. I had an interesting conversation trying to remember with whom around Breeders' Cup time. Maybe it was Marshall Graham, who I was suggesting Code of Honor for this race, and he was sort of making a face about the fact, some notable exceptions, it's a bit of a negative key race in the last few years. I'm sure that would be the best place for him anyway. Well, he was meant to go here, and I guess wasn't trained well, according to Shug, and not seen as a good sign at all. They didn't seem overly negative. It just was put away and brought back at Gulfstream in a few weeks' time, I guess, or whenever he turns it around. And that leaves us with what we have here in the Remsen. Not the most thrilling running, but a couple interesting horses. I was having trouble getting away from Maximus Mischief, just on numbers and thinking that the extra distance wouldn't be a problem and thinking there would be a good trip involved and that maybe the lower profile in New York connections meant that the price could be square to square-ish, but it certainly wasn't a clever opinion or an exciting opinion. Do you have anything interesting in here?
I think there's 2 horses in here that can win. Well, I mean, I guess there's more than that, but there's 2 that are going to take a lot of money. One of them being Maximus Mischief, who, I don't love was 1-9 with blue fractions going 7 at Parks. Now is going to go 1 mile and 1/8.
He finished up really well.
What's that?
He finished up well.
Yeah, of course, but he finished up well because he went blue early and he didn't have anyone looking him in the eyes.
You see plenty of horses who still don't finish all that impressively, though.
100%. I'm going to go with Network Effect. Obviously, with the Chad factor, with is being one. Whoever's buying Klarevich's horses clearly can buy a good horse. I don't think there's any question about that. Got the good figure last time. Ran against Call Paul, who won a stake at Saratoga, who was third in that race at Aqueduct November 4th. And then Vacoma for George Weaver, who I think is probably in the top 5 of 2-year-olds that are out there. And so the running line surrounding Network Effect obviously make a huge difference there. And no offense to Pennington, but I'll take Javier Castellano any day over that one.
Frankie I met him years ago at the Paddock Bar. He was not drinking, just in town at Saratoga to ride something. Some friend of a friend, some connection, got a chance to meet him. Nice guy. And it'd be a cool story to see him get a win at a place like this. But I know what you're saying. Obviously, there's none better than Javier. So yeah, it's one or the other. And in the coin flip, we each went the other way. We'll see what happens on Saturday afternoon. And that brings us to the Cigar Mile, and maybe we'll have enough time to talk about this and get it in. But there's a lot going on in here with our buddy Mendelssohn. First of all, just you want to give props for the fact that this horse has danced so many dances throughout the year. Has been a model, and something that, in a world where I think we correctly complain about horses and time between starts and not taking chances, connections just deserve to be commended for continuing to try with this guy. I don't think this needs to be the end. I know he won't run. It seems like this is a pretty clear indication to me that he ain't running next year, but I still think the idea of the Pegasus makes sense. His race in the Classic was so good. I mean, I think it's, to me, one of like the unheralded excellent races that I can remember, just because the pace was so fast and it might not have been on the best part of the track and still hung on gamely for a long, long time. Now, what this horse needs, to me, to produce a winning effort is not less ground and other speed in the race. It's the opposite. It's what I'm hoping might happen in the Pegasus, where he gets to go farther and boss a pace for once in his life. But I don't know. From a gambling point of view, maybe he'll run another good one here and get beat and go to the Pegasus a much bigger price than he would have. And maybe that's a really good thing. I don't think I can bet him here, JK. I just think he's going to be way too short, even coming off that race that I think is so much better than the paper. I still can't pull the trigger at what I'm sure is going to be shorter than 2-1, not in a race where there are some other interesting ways to go with horses who I think are going to get better trips. Before I give a pick in the race, just want to hear what you've thought about my little Mendelssohn monologue here.
Well, first of all, I'll start with I can bet him. That's the first thing. The second thing is I agree. Those are claps. I think that the way this horse is being campaigned is definitely something that we should all admire from a sporting standpoint. The other thing is I want to read a quote that I saw. Tom Ryan retweeted a piece that Sid Fernando did, and Aiden was quoted as saying, "What's changed with the lads is that they don't want their horses to go to stud with false pretenses anymore. They're thinking of the big picture, so they want to expose them to see what their limitations are." And I think that that's really, whether it's, you believe it or not, I think it's really cool that they're doing that. And I commend them for really tightening the screws on their horses to find out what they're made of.
As a fan of the sport, it's phenomenal. From a business point of view, I can't say that I understand it. Was there more in there?
Well, I mean, there's a whole article, but here's the thing. I mean, I don't think that from a financial standpoint, I don't think that they're in a position where all the decisions they make need to be financially sound. I think they can afford to make some mistakes. Here's what I'll say about Mendelssohn. And there's one way this horse can win, and I have no idea if it will happen. And the way that it can happen is that Ryan needs to understand he's on the rail, and he better send away from there like he has in his last 3 races.
Surely he will. I'm
a little bit concerned that Mendelssohn is quick enough to get that position. He cannot be rated and sit in the pocket going a mile. He can't win doing that. If Ryan can break him away from there and somehow get him off of the rail, I think he'll win for fun. if that can happen. But for whatever reason, if he gets buried down in there or whatever, the trip doesn't work out, he'll be in trouble. But his last 2 races have just been absolutely phenomenal. He's an absolute dirt horse, and he's proved it by the 2 races that, although he ran 3rd and ran 5th, and even the race before in the Travers, those races are winning efforts and quality efforts that show how talented this horse is. Now, with that said, the much better price, the much better draw, the much more upside in terms of market value for me would be Coppertown. Came off the 371-day layoff going into Keeneland. I remember calling Sean Tugel that morning and saying, "Hey, Tugel, I want to single the horse in this contest, 3 to 5. Is he going to run?" And he said the plan, he's fit. The plan is he's going to run in the allowance race at Keeneland, and then he will run in the Cigar Mile. This is the plan. It's 49 days in between for Todd. He ran – the figure wasn't that fast last time, but he ran impressively. It looked good. And if he can somehow find the figure that he ran back at Belmont in 2017, he can be extremely tough with Javier, but he's going to be in the right position, perched outside. He doesn't need nearly as many things to go right for him as Mendelssohn does, but I absolutely think that Mendelssohn can win the race.
I was going to go for a longer price. Everything you said about Coppertown is right. I was sort of seeing Coppertown and Mendelssohn as big negatives for one another, just in terms of the race within the race, because I think they're going to – each one of them is going to have a race in and of itself to beat the other one. And then I was thinking could end up getting left vulnerable. And I was going to take a try with Timeline, who I thought the last race was pretty darn good, breaking through the gate beforehand, trying to close in a situation that did not favor closers one bit. Talk about excellent riders who know how to take advantage of a potential pace situation. John Velasquez, I think things are going to go really nicely for him, and I think he has a chance to run a really big race here. And I think betting wise, I might keep it simple and key around him. And I'm certainly not going to be losing if it comes 1-7 or 5-7 or 1-5-7 or 5-1-7. But I think that in terms of trying to get some value out of the race, for me, it's going to be heading in a different direction than either of those obvious top 2. What are you thinking in terms of betting strategy in this race and on this card?
I gave a pick 3 for out of the gate where I used Network Effect in the Remsen. I used Mendelssohn and Coppertown in this race, and then in the last race, Charlie Baker has 2 horses in. One of them forward, one of them from out of it, and I figured he had the race over a barrel.
Makes sense. You don't see Timeline at all?
Oh, no. I see Timeline. I see Timeline and Sunny Ridge both closing into kind of slow paces with a nice long lead up into this race.
Sunny Ridge, I just as easily mentioned, actually.
Yeah, I don't think that, like, if Mendelssohn makes the lead, I don't feel like Coppertown's going to go up there and ding dong. And I think Coppertown could end up loose if Mendelssohn doesn't make the lead. So I don't see – and I said this before, and I'll admittedly say that I was wrong. I said the same thing about Diversify and Mendelssohn when they ran against each other in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, and they did ding dong. This is a little bit of a different race. It's shorter. I just don't – I think that, you know, I don't see how that would happen. I think that one of them will get to the lead. The other one will sit off.
I wasn't necessarily thinking that you're wrong. I wasn't saying it had to be a hammer and tongs from the get-go. I just think that Coppertown, I mean, who knows? They could back it down enough, but I think that Ryan is going to be on his bike as he's been the last few races going on Mendelssohn, and that horse is so good, and Castellano knows how good that horse is. Maybe having to engage a little earlier and just giving just enough rope for the closers. That's what I was thinking, as opposed to like an all-out duel. Just to clarify, but I am actually really interested to see how it plays out. And I'll tell you what, if I don't need to cash a ticket, and I'll be very happy seeing Mendelssohn go back to the winner's circle. It would be nice to get a win, though. I mean, you and I feel so vindicated from our opinions about this horse earlier in the year, but the fact is he still hasn't won, and it would be so nice to get to see him to do that, or it's going to be one of these things for years. I think people will still be scoffing about Mendelssohn, not realizing what a quality racehorse he is.
He's running in tough spots, and look, this is no disrespect to Aidan O'Brien, not even a little bit, but I still sometimes wonder what would have happened if they would have just left the horse over here with Todd. I mean, obviously, Coolmore has a relationship with Todd. just because it's just a different animal. It's a different type of. It's like, I don't think that Bob Baffert would have won all the races that Lady Eli won. It's no knock on Bob. I obviously have the silver wig in my backpack right now. I just wonder what someone like Todd or Bill Mott would have done with a horse like Mendelssohn, where he didn't have to go back and forth and was trained like a dirt horse over a dirt track with a dirt trainer.
It could go either way, though. I mean, I think you have to recognize that could go, that experiment could go either way, and he might not have withstood the rigors. It's a lot harder on horses to live at a racetrack than it is at Ballydoyle.
Oh, of course. No, without a doubt. I don't discount that at all. I just wonder,
I think, to me, it's just the thing that people aren't going to want to hear, and they're going to want to think it's a cop-out. It's just situational. As we've said, give this guy some of the setups that we've seen Baffert horses have in Grade 1 stakes over the last few years. And I think he puts up a tour de force. But when you get in spots as a speed horse where, you're tangling the way he has in the last two starts, it's so unusual to see that. He's happened to be in those positions, and obviously he hasn't been able to win. But I think those of us who really appreciate dirt racing know how good this horse is, despite the fact that we don't see any ones in the farthest right-hand side of that running line. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to see one on Saturday. Like I said, I'd be absolutely thrilled. I just don't need to risk. I'm, talking about betting win or play. He's not going to be valued about win. I'm not going to be doing that. Vertically, for sure. And boy, I don't care. I'd almost rather lose. I'm not going to be betting enough in this race that I wouldn't rather lose and just see him win for the fact that, he's one of the most discussed horses in the history of the podcast. And I've made many impassioned defenses of him with the latest being right now. And I'm glad to hear you agree with me in principle on all this stuff. And if anything, you like him more than me here.
No, I do like him. Jake, I sent Jake like a video, the Prince of Keeneland of there was a video the other day of like Aiden in the car, like driving next to Mendelssohn galloping. And I was simply saying that was a cool video. I had never really seen a video like that. And Jake was like, "You sure do love that horse." I was like, "I don't love him that much. I just thought it was a cool video."
He's a polarizing figure, this Mendelssohn. He's good for racing to have these kind of discussions. Hopefully he gets one more chance no matter what happens. You imagine he will?
I would think so. I mean, why stop now?
Right. It's not going to cost them the breeding season. And he'll be a very interesting stallion too, no matter what happens. The bloodlines alone and the toughness he's shown, and not exactly the sexiest stallion races in the world, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf and the Dubai Derby, but it's enough. It's enough for the $3 million whose bloodlines have gotten even sexier since that price was paid, and he's one of the most valuable horses around at this point, no matter what happens. But I just feel like that win, as a racing fan, the win would be really cool.
We almost earned the yearling fee back. I mean, I think he's made like $2.5 million. So, yeah. It's a free roll.
Yeah. We'll have to look at it too, what Coolmore's situation is in the Pegasus, if they I assume they have a slot already, but even if they have a runner for it, they probably, as we saw last year, deals to be cut, etc. Hey, JK, I'm going to the UK for the Pegasus, which I guess the bad news is I'm going to be missing the Pegasus, but it looks like I'm booked in to work on At the Races Friday through Sunday that weekend at the new West London studios. It's actually no longer At the Races at that point. It'll be Sky Racing. That should be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'll miss you in Florida, but it's always fun to get over there.
A closing thought for us, JK, before we throw it.
If you don't listen to the Sports Forum podcast, it's good. You're lucky you missed it this week. Wednesday, I said that if the Saints lost to the Cowboys, that I would never bet another sporting event in my life.
Have you broken that yet? It's almost noon the next day. Have you broken it yet?
No, but I'm considering it. That's for sure.
Pretty funny. Well, that prediction maybe wasn't so hot, but you've given out a lot of winners on there, as has Scott Gramling. And the show itself, I just thought this was the funnest one we ever did. We had a good time. giving each other a hard time sometimes, but mostly just yapping about games, and a lot of college stuff on there and NFL stuff on there. Going to hopefully be spreading out in some new, more interesting directions as well. All right, that's it. JK, thank you for taking the time and all the hard work you do. Thanks to producer Craig and AJ, to Willie Nile and Travis Stone for helping out with the theme up top. For more of Willie's music, go to willienile.com. For Travis, turn on a Churchill simul feed. Come on. Most of all, thanks to all of you for listening. Let's make the show so much fun to do. If you want to join us for the Christmas quiz, tell us why you should be on the show. Podcast at drf.com. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. We'll be back next Tuesday, perhaps with a big name special guest. Maybe you'll win all your photos.